in the northern edge of the old kingdom, past the river fork, beyond the moor trail, where the heather grows like tangled wool, sat the village of Bitterroot. No map ever named it. Travelers rarely passed through, and if they did, they kept their heads low and their stay short. It was a place where roofs slouched under the weight of time, and people lived not in pursuit of wealth or wonder, but of enough. Enough food, enough warmth, enough luck to reach the next season, with breath in their lungs and boots still stitched. It was also the place where Merrick coughed. He was a thatcher, known for patching roofs with straw so tightly even mice had trouble sneaking in. His hands were thick and dry from a life spent wrestling bundles of reed and straw into obedience. His wife, Edrin, a quiet woman with eyes like overcast skies, had long since grown used to his grumbles and silences. The cough came on a chill morning, sharp and sudden. He stood by the hearth, sipping thin turnip broth, when it burst from his chest like a snapped branch. Merrick blinked, wiped his mouth, and said nothing. Edrin paused in her sewing, head tilted, but didn't speak either. After all, people coughed. Wood smoke sat thick in every house this time of year. But later that night, he coughed again. Then again. By the third evening, the cough was a rhythm. Dry, deep, winding like a rope being pulled too tight in his chest. Merrick sat hunched in his chair while Edrin ground dried yarrow in her mortar, her hands unsteady. "You should rest," she murmured. "I'm sitting, aren't I?" he rasped. "Not here, in the bed. I'll fetch the old quilt. I'll be fine by morning." Edrin didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, she reached for the crock of honey, but it was near empty. The bees hadn't swarmed well that year. What little they'd gathered had been traded for oats weeks ago. Merrick's skin had gone gray around the edges, like wood left out in rain. The hearth did little to warm him, though the fire still hissed and danced, as it always had. Edrin sat closer, watching his chest rise and fall. The next morning, Merrick couldn't rise to dress. That's when Edrin sent their youngest, Wit, thin-legged and wild-haired, to the edge of the village, where the forest pressed in like a heavy blanket. There, in a small, crooked hut, wreathed with drying herbs, lived Wenna, healer, widow, and rumor. Wit arrived at the healer's door, red-faced and panting. "Please, Mistress Wenna," he wheezed. "Dad's sick. The cough's gone to his bones, Ma says." Wrapped in layers of wool and smelling faintly of vinegar and thyme, blinked slowly and nodded. "Get you home, boy. I'll come when I've boiled the kettle." She moved with deliberate slowness. Nothing in Wenna's hut was fast. She selected her pouch of dried lungwort, a string of leeches from the crock by the window, a dull-bladed lancet wrapped in cloth, and the dried heel of foxglove root. She stuffed them into her satchel alongside a roll of linen, then tied a flask of garlic wine to her belt. It was mid-afternoon by the time she arrived at Merrick's cottage. Edrin had cleared the hearth, laid straw around the bed, and wet cloths for washing. The room stank faintly of damp wool and sickness. Wenna nodded once, set her satchel down with a quiet thump, and said only, "Let's begin." Wenna bent over Merrick's cot, her hands pale and calloused. She pressed one to his forehead and frowned. "Fever's near burning. Too much heat in the blood. We'll bleed him first." Edrin stiffened. "Will it help?" "Perhaps, or perhaps not. But it must be done." From her satchel, Wenna withdrew the lancet and a strip of linen. She tied it tightly around Merrick's forearm, just below the elbow. His skin bulged purple with pressure. With a slow breath, Wenna pricked the crook of his arm. Blood trickled, slow and dark. Edrin looked away. Wenna caught the blood in a chipped ceramic bowl, whispering a prayer to Saint Garin of the ailing flesh. When she was done, she pressed linen to the wound and fastened it tight. Next came the leeches. Wenna placed them on Merrick's chest, near the sternum. They squirmed, then latched, fat, slick, alive. Merrick groaned, but did not stir. Finally, Wenna prepared the poultice. Comfrey, crushed garlic, ash bark, pounded with a pestle until the mixture looked like damp clay. She slathered it over his ribs and covered it with cloth. Edrin knelt at the bedside, whispering, "Please, let it be enough." Wenna did not reply. Night settled like soot. Outside, wind curled between shutters and stirred loose straw on the ground. Inside, the hearth crackled low, throwing flickering shadows across the walls. Wenna sat in the corner, her hands folded. She had seen fevers break. She had seen them win. Edrin dozed in a chair, her head resting on her hand, eyes half open. Wit and his older sister Lysa slept on a bed of hay in the loft, quiet for once. Merrick muttered in sleep, nonsense syllables, the sort that carry meaning only in dreams or sickness. Wenna heard fragments. Roof patched the broke. She listened. Once, years ago, she'd treated a man with the same cough. He hadn't lived. She still remembered his breath, like air escaping a bellows, thin and desperate. She rose, checked the cloths, and replaced the poultice with a fresh mix. She placed a roasted onion slice beneath Merrick's tongue and tied it in place with linen, as was tradition. "Onions draw the rot from within," she whispered, mostly to herself. Then she returned to the chair and waited. In Bitterroot, waiting was the cure more often than not. And often, it wasn't. Part 2. A Sickness in the Straw. By morning, Merrick had not worsened, but neither had he improved. Edrin sat by the bed, twisting a frayed cloth between her fingers. The air in the cottage smelled of boiled herbs and sweat. Wenna had not left. She sat near the hearth with a bowl of lentils, eating in silence. "Will he live?" Edrin asked at last. Wenna did not look up. "I cannot say. You've cured worse." "I've buried worse." The words hung like smoke. There were those in Bitterroot who said Wenna was too old to heal, that her mind had slicked, or that her cures were just rituals she no longer understood. Some said she'd once been a nun who broke her vows. Others claimed her husband died not from plague, but by poison from her own garden. Edrin didn't believe such things, but she had heard them. Everyone had. Wenna stirred her lentils. He must rest, and no meat, Broth only. I have barley and dried carrot. That will do. Outside, the roosters cried. Another day had begun, gray and cold. The door creaked open mid-morning. It was Alla Brannick, a pale woman from 2 cottages down, holding her apron up like a sling. Inside it, a bundle of cloth. "Please, Mistress Wenna," she said, voice trembling. "My girls come out in sores." Wenna stood slowly. "How many?" "3, behind the ears, red as coals." "Any fever?" "No." "Then it may be nothing. I'll come before sundown." Alec glanced at Merrick on the cot. "It isn't plague, is it?" "No," Wenna said sharply. "There's no blackening. No swelling of the neck. Not yet." Alla's fingers gripped the door frame. "The Lord's man passed through last week. From the city." Wenna turned her head. "That's where rot travels fastest." "Should we send word?" "To whom?" Wenna asked. "They'd burn the fields and lock us in our homes. Let me see the girl first." Alla nodded, lips pressed thin. She left without another word. Edrin said nothing, but her hand drifted to her own neck. That night, Wenna walked to the Brannick home, a round-walled cottage with a single shuttered window. She examined the girl, a child of 6, with wide blue eyes and hair like dry wheat. The sores were red, raised, but not weeping. "Not plague," Wenna muttered. "Pox likely, or nettle rash." She left a salve of ground tansy and goat's butter. Back in her own hut, she stirred dried valerian into a boiling pot. The steam coated her face. She moved slowly, hands remembering each motion long before her mind caught up. Above her hearth hung a bundle of dried foxglove tied with red twine. Her husband, Alden, had picked it years ago, before the illness, before the fever took his breath like a thief in the night. Some said she could have saved him. Some said she didn't try. She crushed more root into the pot and stared into the steam. Back in Edrin's cottage, Merrick stirred. He muttered in sleep. "Not nonsense this time. Thatch is gone, broken on the north side. Not enough straw." "Shh," Edrin whispered. She dabbed his forehead with a damp cloth. "You're home. You're safe." But Merrick's hands moved as if tying bundles. His arms twitched with invisible weight. Lysa, watching from the loft, said softly, "Is Da dreaming?" "Yes, love. He's dreaming of work." "Can he hear us?" "Maybe." "Will he wake?" Edrin did not answer. The wind howled outside, and a faint knocking echoed from the walls. Not a knock on the door, but the clatter of branches or bones, or both. By the 5th day, the fever broke. Merrick's skin cooled, and his breathing steadied. "He'll live," Wenna said, standing by the bed, arms folded. Edrin nearly collapsed from relief. Thank the saints. "But he won't work for some time. His strength is buried deep. I'll see he rests. I'll come again at week's end." Wenna gathered her things. As she left, she paused. "If the sores spread, or anyone else begins coughing, come to me first, before you speak to others." Edrin nodded slowly. "You think it's coming for more?" "It always does." Outside, the fields sat untouched. The village boys no longer played in the mud lanes. The old women stayed in their homes, and in the hills, black crows gathered on fence posts, watching the thatched rooftops below, like judges waiting for the verdict. Part 3. Shadows on the Wind. The village of Bitterroot never had walls. No gates, no guards, no stone to shield it from wind or wandering beasts. Protection, if it could be called that, came from silence. Bitterroot did not call attention to itself. Not from kings, not from lords, not even from saints. But now, people began locking doors. Old Tom Pestle, whose knees cracked like dry bread, said the wind had changed. That it blew the wrong way over the fields. That the crows no longer cried, only watched. At the village well, women stopped talking. They drew their water in silence, clutching jars to their chests, eyeing each other's faces for flush or sweat. And when Joran the cooper collapsed outside his workshop with a red bloom behind his ear, no one moved to help, not right away. It was Kala, his wife, who ran to him, crying his name. Wenna was called, but by the time she arrived, Joran's breath was shallow and gurgled. Too fast, she muttered. Too fast for a pox. She examined the mark, round, pulsing, almost black at the center. People watched from doorways. No one stepped forward. Wenna treated Joran on the floor of his home. She cut the sore with a heated blade, packed it with moss and lye, and whispered prayers in a tongue older than the villagers had ever heard. "Will he live?" Kala begged. Wenna did not answer. Outside, whispers began. "She brings death, not cure." Joran was strong as an ox just yesterday. She brought the sickness from the forest. Lives alone. Brews devil's tea. At the tavern, Harvin the Reeve asked the room aloud, "What if she's not healing us anymore? What if she's feeding it?" No one disagreed. Merrick had begun to eat again, and barley cakes soaked in milk. He barely spoke, but he stayed awake for hours at a time now. Edrin kept the fire lit day and night. The house always smelled of steam and cloth. Wit brought water from the well each morning. Lysa ground grain. Edrin worked with her sleeves rolled, her hands chapped raw, her mind running always ahead to the next task. Check Merrick's bandages. Boil water. Strip the bed straw. Stir the onion tonic. Keep the children quiet. When the pounding came at the door one night, it broke the rhythm like a dropped dish. It was Kala, her cheeks streaked with tears. "He's gone," she whispered. "He died in his sleep, with the leeches still on his chest." Edrin opened the door wider. "Come in. Sit down." "I can't. If they see me here, they'll talk." "What are they saying?" "They're saying Wenna's cursed." Wenna lit her lantern by the flick of a flint stone. Her hut had grown darker in recent days, not from the weather, but from the mood of the village. Fewer came for medicine. Some passed by her home, making the sign of the cross. At the market, a boy hissed, "Witch." She did not flinch. Not anymore. A crow had taken roost on her chimney, watching her through the smoke. It did not call. It merely sat, unmoving, even as snow began to fall in slow, silent spirals. She tied bundles of dried mint and sage to the rafters, a ritual she hadn't practiced since Alden died. The hut filled with the scent of green bitterness and old bark. She pulled a book from beneath the floorboards, bound in wood and iron clasps. It had no title, only pages stained by time and thumbed by need. She read by lantern light. Ancient recipes, rites for unclean spirits, charms against wind-borne illness. Her finger paused on a page marked with a curled bone splinter. On the 7th night since Joran died, from the village met in secret. They gathered at the longhouse behind the tavern, where the floor was packed dirt and the roof was sagged low enough to touch. There were no shouts, only murmurs. Bitterroot was never a place for loud men. "She's cursed," Harvin said. "Joran's death proves it. The sores, the fever." "She cured Merrick," Edrin countered, though her voice trembled. "Perhaps he lived because she needed someone to vouch for her." "She's lived here longer than any of us," said old Rawl, a shepherd with cloudy eyes. "And she's been old the whole time," muttered someone near the back. "Then let's ask her to leave," Harvin said. "Not harm her. Not yet. But she must go." The vote passed, quietly, but firmly. And so, a plan was made. They would visit her hut at dawn. Part 4. The Name Beneath the Root. They came at dawn. 12 men and women, wrapped in cloaks and silence, walked the path to Wenna's hut. Harvin the Reeve led them, lantern in hand, though the sun had just begun to stir behind the trees. They moved through the mist like ghosts. Birds did not sing. When they reached the hut, they paused. Smoke curled from the chimney. The crow was still there, unmoved, perched like a sentry above the doorway. Harvin stepped forward and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. He turned the latch and pushed open the door. Inside, Wenna sat by the hearth, hands folded in her lap. The fire crackled, the air heavy with crushed sage and drying herbs. Her lantern flickered from the beam overhead. "I'd heard you coming," she said, not looking up. Harvin entered, removing his hood. "Wenna, we've come to ask you to leave." The others shuffled behind him, unsure whether to enter. Wenna tilted her head. "Where would you have me go?" "Anywhere but here. And if the sickness follows, then we'll know it wasn't you." She looked at them now, each face caught in the flicker of firelight. "I have buried friends, cared for your children, fed the hungry in lean winters. But now that fear has taken your breath, you'd cast me out like spoiled bread." "Folk are dying," Harvin said, voice tight. "You cannot stay." She nodded, slowly. "Then I'll go." She left that same afternoon. No cart, no mule. Only a bundle of herbs wrapped in linen, a pouch of salt, and the wooden book tied to her waist with rope. The children watched from the fence posts. Edrin stood by her gate, arms crossed. Wenna passed her and paused. "You'll watch your husband carefully, yes?" Edrin nodded. "He still wakes coughing, but less. Boil the water, burn the old straw, sleep with rosemary in the fire." Wenna moved on. At the edge of the trees, she stopped and bent down. From beneath a half-buried stone near the roots of a hawthorn bush, she pulled a small satchel. Inside, a coil of black thread, a ring of copper, and a smooth flat stone etched with runes. She tied the stone to her belt, stood, and disappeared into the woods. The crow followed her, flapping into the trees without a sound. That night, the sky was clear. Stars shimmered in the dark like cold needles. Merrick sat upright in bed for the first time in over a week. Edrin fed him barley porridge with a wooden spoon, slow and patient. "Where is she?" he asked between bites. "Gone." He blinked. "Gone where?" Past tense. He looked down at the bowl. "She saved me." "I know." "Then why?" "Because one man lived and one man died, and fear weighs more than truth." Later, when the fire dimmed, Edrin stepped outside for air. The wind was soft, but wrong. It smelled of turned soil and something beneath it. Damp wood, sour cloth. She looked toward the hills and saw torches. 3, 4, flickering in the dark, not moving. Past tense, watching. Deep in the forest, Wenna walked until the trees grew strange, older. Bark split wide like wounds, moss that glowed faintly in the starlight. She stopped at a hollow, an old stone ring half swallowed by earth. No one in Bitterroot remembered who had built it. She lit a small fire from dry pine needles and sat. The crow landed nearby and tilted its head. "I know," she whispered. "It's beginning again." From her pouch, she withdrew a scrap of linen and unwrapped a yellowed tooth. She placed it in the fire. It hissed. Smoke rose in spirals. She began to chant in a voice older than the forest. In the village, old Nan, the midwife, took ill. She hadn't left her bed in 2 days. She muttered in her sleep, breathing through her mouth, her skin tight across her bones. Her apprentice, a girl of 15 named Sibby, came to fetch Edrin. "She won't drink," the girl said, "and she's gone stiff." Edrin brought broth and boiled cloths. Nan's eyes fluttered open as Edrin sat beside her. "There's something in the wind," Nan whispered. "It walks, not seen, but felt, like breath down the back." Edrin pressed the cloth to her head. "Shh, rest. I remember this," Nan rasped. "Long ago, before you were born, when the trees bled." "What do you mean?" But Nan only closed her eyes again. Outside, the wind picked up, and across the fields, the torches were gone. Once, years ago, she treated a man with the same cough. He hadn't lived. She still remembered his breath, like air escaping a bellows, thin and desperate. She rose, checked the cloths, and replaced the poultice with a fresh mix. She placed a roasted onion slice beneath Merrick's tongue and tied it in place with linen, as was tradition. "Onions draw the rot from within," she whispered, mostly to herself. Then she returned to the chair and waited. In Bitterroot, waiting was the cure more often than not. And often, it wasn't. Part 2. A sickness in the straw. By morning, Merrick had not worsened, but neither had he improved. Edrin sat by the bed twisting a frayed cloth between her fingers. The air in the cottage smelled of boiled herbs and sweat. Wenna had not left. She sat near the hearth with a bowl of lentils, eating in silence. "Will he live?" Edrin asked at last. Wenna did not look up. "I cannot say. You've cured worse. I've buried worse." The words hung like smoke. There were those in Bitterroot who said Wenna was too old to heal, that her mind had slipped, or that her cures were just rituals she no longer understood. Some said she'd once been a nun who broke her vows. Others claimed her husband died, not from plague, but by poison from her own garden. Edrin didn't believe such things, but she had heard them. Everyone had. Wenna stirred her lentils. "He must rest, and no meat, broth only. I have barley and dried carrot. That will do." Outside, the roosters cried. Another day had begun, gray and cold. The door creaked open mid-morning. It was Alla Brannick, a pale woman from 2 cottages down, holding her apron up like a sling. Inside it, a bundle of cloth. "Please, Mistress Wenna," she said, voice trembling. "My girls come out in sores." Wenna stood slowly. "How many?" "3, behind the ears, red as coals." "Any fever?" "No." "Then it may be nothing. I'll come before sundown." Alla glanced at Merrick on the cot. "It isn't plague, is it?" "No," Wenna said sharply. "There's no blackening, no swelling of the neck. Not yet." Alla's fingers gripped the doorframe. "The Lord's man passed through last week, from the city." Wenna turned her head. "That's where rot travels fastest." "Should we send word?" "To whom?" Wenna asked. "They'd burn the fields and lock us in our homes. Let me see the girl first." Alla nodded. lips pressed thin. She left without another word. Edrin said nothing, but her hand drifted to her own neck. That night, Wenna walked to the Brannick home, a round-walled cottage with a single-shuttered window. She examined the girl, a child of 6 with wide blue eyes and hair like dry wheat. The sores were red, raised, but not weeping. Not plague, Wenna muttered. Pox, likely, or nettle rash. She left a salve of ground tansy and goat's butter. Back in her own hut, she stirred dried valerian into a boiling pot. The steam coated her face. She moved slowly, hands remembering each motion long before her mind caught up. Above her hearth hung a bundle of dried foxglove, tied with red twine. Her husband, Alden, had picked it years ago, before the illness, before the fever took his breath like a thief in the night. Some said she could have saved him, some said she didn't try. She crushed more root into the pot and stared into the steam. Back in Edrin's cottage, Merrick stirred. He muttered in sleep. Not nonsense this time. Thatch is gone, broken on the north side. Not enough straw. Shh, Edrin whispered. She dabbed his forehead with a damp cloth. You're home, you're safe. But Merrick's hands moved as if tying bundles. His arms twitched with invisible weight. Lysa, watching from the loft, said softly, Is Da dreaming? Yes, love, he's dreaming of work. Can he hear us? Maybe. Will he wake? Edrin did not answer. The wind howled outside, and a faint knocking echoed from the walls. Not a knock on the door, but the clatter of branches, or bones, or both. By the 5th day, the fever broke. Merrick's skin cooled, and his breathing steadied. He'll live, Wenna said, standing by the bed, arms folded. Edrin nearly collapsed from relief. Thank the saints. But he won't work for some time. His strength is buried deep. I'll see he rests. I'll come again at week's end. Wenna gathered her things. As she left, she paused. If the sores spread, or anyone else begins coughing, come to me first. Before you speak to others. Edrin nodded slowly. You think it's coming for more? It always does. Outside, the fields sat untouched. The village boys no longer played in the mud lanes. The old women stayed in their homes. And in the hills, black crows gathered on fence posts, watching the thatched rooftops below, like judges waiting for the verdict. Arc 5, beneath bark and bone. Lysa dreamed of feathers. She stood in the barley field, though the stalks were gone, flattened, dead. The sky hung low and gray, like damp wool. One by one, black crows landed at her feet. They did not caw. They did not blink. They stared at her. Then one spoke. Lysa tried to run, but her legs sank into the earth. She opened her mouth to scream. Only soil came out. She awoke gasping, fingers digging into her straw mattress. Wit stirred beside her in the loft. Lysa, he murmured. Go back to sleep. She whispered, heart racing. It was only a dream. But outside the window, on the crooked branch of the old alder, a single crow watched them, unblinking. In the morning, Edrin went to change Merrick's bedding. As she pulled the old straw aside, she noticed something carved into the underside of the wooden bed frame. Thin, precise lines forming a circular sigil. Not burn marks, not a child's doodle. A symbol. She ran her fingers over it, then quickly covered it again with fresh straw. That evening, she asked Lysa if anyone had played under the bed. No, the girl said. Not even you and Wit? Lysa shook her head. Later, when Merrick fell asleep, Edrin returned to the bed with a taper candle and studied the marking again. It was not just a circle. It was a seal, and it looked familiar. In the hollow, Wenna lit another fire. This time, she placed within it a dried sprig of elder blossom, a child's tooth, and a single candle made from tallow and bone ash. She spoke softly, the words unspoken in decades. Othram, stonekeeper, hear me through ash and air. The flame shivered. The crow took flight suddenly, wings loud in the quiet. From the darkness beyond the trees, something stirred. Not a figure, but a pressure, a bending of the air, as if the forest itself had inhaled. Wenna closed her eyes. "You should not have woken," she whispered. That night, Wenna dreamed of the rope, of the day they came for her, not in Bitterroot, but long before, in a village that no longer existed. She had healed too many, had survived the fevers too often. They dragged her through the streets. A young priest with hollow eyes recited verses. Her hands were tied, her book burned, but the rope snapped. Not from fraying, from something else. She remembered standing in the ash, the others watching in silence. And the wind had whispered her name. Not the name they knew, but the old one. The one she hadn't spoken since the night she buried it beneath the hawthorn. She awoke with dirt beneath her nails. The next day, Millen's goat was found dead near the well. No bite marks, no wounds. But its eyes were gone. And in the mud beside it, symbols the same shape Edrin had seen carved into the bed. Wenna's seal. Millen brought the news to the village square, where the others gathered in alarm. "Wenna's still among us," someone hissed. "She cursed the well. She's watching from the woods." Edrin stood in silence, fingers clenched in her shawl. She looked toward the tree line, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a movement. Not a person. A shape, tall, hunched, crowned in branches. Watching. Part 6. The root that remembers. It was still dark. The coals in the hearth had cooled to faint embers. She reached instinctively for the blanket and found it had slipped to the floor. Something lay beside her on the bed. She sat up sharply. It was a bundle, wrapped in cloth, tied with black thread. She stared at it for a long moment before touching it. Inside, a dried sprig of rosemary, a child's carved wooden toy, and a symbol scrawled in ash on a scrap of leather. The same circular seal. She stepped outside with it, heart pounding, and looked toward the woods. No one was there. But the wind had changed again, and on it, she thought she heard a single word: remember. The next morning, Edrin returned to the hawthorn tree. She dug with her hands, scraping the earth back from the stone Wenna had once crouched beside. The ground was softer than it should have been. Just beneath the topsoil, she uncovered bones. Not animal. Human. Small. A ribcage no bigger than her forearm. Wrapped around it was a rusted copper ring and a strip of wool with ancient stitching. The sigil again, this time sewn into the cloth with red thread. Edrin dropped it and staggered back. She didn't scream, but when she stood, the wind seemed to hush, as if the forest itself was listening. Wenna returned to Bitterroot the following night. She came quietly, cloaked. Her eyes darker than Edrin remembered. "I should not have left the bones unguarded," Wenna said without greeting. "You buried a child, Edrin said. Whose? My daughter. Edrin's breath caught. You never said you had one. She died in the fever, long ago. I tried to save her, tried other things. You brought her back. No, Wenna said softly, but something else followed me back. She untied her satchel, pulling out her book, wrapped in thick oilskin. There is something beneath this land, she said, older than the village, older than even the words we speak. When people die wrong, it wakes. That morning, more sigils appeared. One scratched into the door of the blacksmith's shed. One in soot across the innkeeper's chimney. One traced in blood beneath a cartwheel. Children began to hum strange melodies in the square. Songs no one had taught them. Old Nan died in her sleep. Her body was cold, but her mouth was full of soil. Harvin called for the others to meet. If Wenna is here, she must answer for this, he shouted. She has returned the dead to us. But Edrin stepped forward. She buried the dead. She did not raise them. A silence followed. Then someone whispered. Then who did? Deep in the forest, the hollow burned. Not with fire, but with light. Something stirred beneath it. Not quickly, not angrily, but with patience, with memory. And far above, in the night sky over Bitterroot, the stars flickered and shifted, forming a pattern no shepherd could name. Part 7. Salt, Fire, and Fear. 3 nights passed with no moon. Each morning, a new animal was found dead. No wounds, just stillness and eyes gone black. The Brannock's last goat, Tom Pessel's chickens, a dog outside the tavern. The well water began to stink of iron, and each morning, someone found a mark near their door. Not burned or painted, grown. The grass itself twisting into the sigil shape. The villagers avoided saying it aloud, but a word had begun to pass among them nonetheless. Curse. Edrin boiled rosemary over the hearth. Not for healing, but for warding. Lysa had taken to sleepwalking, whispering to people who weren't there. Wit had become silent altogether. Merrick stirred less often now. His body was healing, but his mind seemed elsewhere. His eyes watching the rafters, as if waiting for something to come through them. That night, the fire flared high without cause. A voice spoke from the smoke, not loud, not sharp, just a whisper. You opened the door. Edrin dropped the ladle. The fire snapped shut again, low and still. She didn't speak of it, but that night she locked every window. Wenna gathered supplies from the edges of the woods. Roots, stones, grave bark, wax, and rope. She dug a circle trench near the old hollow, hands bleeding from the frost-hardened soil. Within it, she set 12 stones, one for each direction, each carved with a piece of the sigil, not a replication, but a binding. This land remembers, she muttered. It never forgets its debts. She spoke aloud as she worked, not to herself, but to whatever now watched her through the trees. You were fed once, I remember. I was a child then. Wind answered her, slow and low, bending the tips of the branches. At the village square, Harvin held a torch. Others followed. Dozens now. The fear had grown legs. They say Wenna walks in the woods again, Harvin said. They say she's burning signs into the soil. They say this was her plan all along. Edrin stepped forward. And what will killing her do? Harvin's eyes were wild. Make it stop. And if it doesn't? Harvin raised his torch higher. Then we burn her house, her woods, and every mark she left behind. The villagers cheered. Firelight flickered in their eyes. The mob turned toward the trees. Wenna stood at the hollow, her circle finished. She placed the book in the center, surrounded by salted stones. The seal was complete. And so, she spoke the name. Once. Twice. 3 times. The ground trembled faintly. From beneath the earth came the sound of breath. Not air, but soil shifting inward, as if the land itself had lungs. In the trees, crows gathered. Hundreds. Thousands. Silent. The stars above Bitterroot flickered once more, then vanished entirely. And then the wind died. All at once, only the crackle of fire and the sound of boots in frost-hardened mud. Stay together, Harvin whispered. If we lose the path, we lose more than time. Branches clawed at sleeves. Roots caught at heels. Someone muttered that the trees were closer than they'd ever been before. Another said, "The air feels thick." Another whispered, "It's listening." No one answered after that. She stood within the stone circle, her face shadowed by firelight. I woke it, because you already fed it. The ground shuddered. The circle of villagers froze. Beneath their feet, something shifted. Not like an earthquake, but like a body turning in its sleep. Then, the hollow at the center of the stones cracked. A seam opened in the earth, dry and narrow. From within, a sound, like wind moving through hollow bone. The torches flickered wildly. Crows exploded from the trees, a black cloud. Harvin screamed, "Kill her!" But none moved, because from the fissure, something began to rise. Not a body, a shape, a memory made flesh. The stones of the circle glowed faintly. Salt burned along the trench Wenna had dug, releasing acrid smoke. She raised her arms and spoke again, not loudly, but clearly. Words in a language the villagers did not know, but felt. Their legs grew heavy. Their hearts pounded. Some dropped their torches. Others fell to their knees. Edrin pushed through the crowd, gasping. "Wenna, what is it?" Wenna's eyes shone with tears. "A wound," she whispered, "that never healed. It wants the village. It wants what was promised. What was promised? Oblivion." The shape rose fully now, tall, indistinct, like smoke coiled around bone. A face without features, arms that ended in branching roots. Its body shimmered like damp earth under moonlight. It stood over the circle, unmoving. Then it lowered its head toward Wenna. She stepped forward. "No more," she said. "You've eaten your fill. You will sleep again." The shape tilted as if listening. Then it opened its mouth, and a wind of voices poured out. The voices of the lost, of the buried, of children long dead, of the fields that once burned. Every villager fell to their knees, clutching their ears. except Wenna. She stood tall. Part 9. What was buried. The voices fell silent. Wenna turned to face the villagers, still kneeling, faces streaked with tears and dirt. "Do you know," she said, "how Bitterroot was founded?" No one answered. 3 centuries ago, a fleeing people came here, starving, desperate. The land was wild. The winters were cruel. And when famine came, they made a pact. She pointed to the hollow. They buried their dead, but not whole. They fed the land. They fed it. In exchange, their crops returned, their wells cleared, and so they stayed. Harvin trembled. That's not in the church records." "Of course not, because men forget what they feed when it's no longer hungry." The shape pulsed with quiet hunger. Edrin, clutching Lisa and Wit beside her, stepped forward. "What does it want now?" Wenna looked at the children. "Memory. I don't understand. It cannot exist without us. It feeds on what we carry. Guilt, suffering, blood owed. That's how it stays. But it must be named to be sealed." Edrin's eyes narrowed. "Then name it." "I cannot. I gave it my name once, in trade, long ago. I cannot break that bond. Then who can?" The wind stirred. Wenna closed her eyes and began to cry. From her satchel, Wenna withdrew a bundle, wrapped in linen and bound with waxed string. Inside, the page from her book she had never shown anyone. Ink faded, letters old. She held it to her chest. "Take me," she whispered to the shape. "I remember what they did. I remember what I did. The root is hollow, but I am not." The shape hesitated. Then it moved closer, one arm of twisting soil reaching toward her chest. But Wenna turned to her, smiling softly. "Tell them to burn the field, salt the well, and never dig again." Then she stepped into the shape and vanished. The earth shuddered once more. The hollow caved in, slowly, like a wound closing. The glow faded. The wind died. The villagers stood, stunned. No one spoke. Only the crow remained, perched now on the stone where Wenna had stood. It cawed once, sharp and clear. Then it flew off into the trees. Harvin dropped his torch and fell to his knees. She gave herself. Edrin placed a hand on his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "She gave us a choice. And now, we must remember." In the weeks that followed, we must remember. Bitterroot changed. The field was burned, the well sealed with stone. No more dreams. No more marks. The old fear lingered, but softer now, like the echo of a bell that had finally stopped ringing. Edrin tended to the sick. Merrick recovered, slowly, silently. Lysa stopped sleepwalking. Wit smiled again. And in the forest, where the hollow had once been, wildflowers bloomed strangely red. No one picked them. But sometimes if one walked far enough beneath the trees, one could hear a voice on the wind. A woman's voice, soft, steady, watching, waiting, and always remembering. Final chapter, the piece that follows. Spring came late that year. Snow lingered in the corners of fields until the 2nd month. The trees budded cautiously, and the river swelled with meltwater that shimmered red at dusk. But no one spoke of the color. No one asked why. Edrin planted barley behind the cottage. She tended the rows alone, sometimes singing under her breath. Old lullabies passed from her mother's mother. Lysa helped. Wit watched the clouds. Merrick whittled by the fire again. And though none of them said it aloud, they all felt the same thing. The land was lighter. The woods quieter, but never empty. No more sigils appeared. The crows still came, but not in droves. Now they perched like ordinary birds, curious, not prophetic. Children returned to the fields. The tavern reopened. Even Harvin smiled again, though he did not speak much. The well was sealed with stone and lime, a wooden marker placed over it. No name, just the old sigil, faintly carved, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Wenna's hut remained empty. None moved to claim it. Some said her crow still circled it, watching from above. Others said they'd seen a shape in the trees. Most simply lowered their heads and kept walking. One evening, Edrin told the children the truth. Not all of it, but enough. She told them of the village's beginning, the hunger, the hollow, the pact. She told them Wenna was not a witch, but a keeper of something no one else wished to carry. She told them that some roots grow deep, not because they seek to harm, but because the soil remembers what was buried there. Lysa asked if it would return. Wit asked if it ever truly left. Edrin answered both the same way. We tend the land now, with care, with memory, and with watchfulness. That summer, a flower grew outside Edrin's door. Small, red-veined, bright and still. Wit asked if they should pluck it. No, Edrin said. It's not ours. Lysa left a feather beside it. Later that night, Edrin thought she saw something at the tree line. A woman's outline. Faded, smiling. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched. And when Edrin blinked, she was gone. But in the distance, a single crow cried once, sharp and clean, and then fell silent. The village endured. There were still harsh winters. There were still bad harvests, but no one forgot anymore. The hollow was overgrown by next spring. No more flowers, no more light, just earth, just trees, just silence. And that was enough. Edrin grew old. Wit learned to carve. Lysa left one day to see the wider kingdom. But none forgot what Wenna gave. And when the wind howled, they did not call it evil. They simply listened. And then they closed their windows and let the land sleep. The end.